Dogs don't bark at nothing, Daniel Carter would say later, but on that quiet afternoon no one believed it. The old house stood at the edge of Dry Creek like a tired memory the town had forgotten to erase, its gray wooden boards warped by decades of wind rolling down from the Montana hills. The sky above was wide and pale, the kind of sky that made every sound feel smaller, swallowed by the open land. Staff Sergeant Daniel Carter stepped out of the pickup truck and paused, boots crunching softly over gravel, the air cool and dry against his face. Beside him, Rex jumped down from the passenger seat, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat and sharp amber eyes that seemed to read the world differently than most people. Rex usually moved with calm precision, the quiet discipline of a dog trained beside Marines for years, but the moment his paws touched the ground he stiffened. His ears shot forward. His nose lifted. Then he began to bark. It wasn't the playful bark Daniel heard when Rex chased a ball or greeted a familiar face. This was different, deep, urgent, the kind of bark that vibrated through the chest. The sound echoed across the empty yard as Rex sprinted toward the front porch of the abandoned house. Daniel followed at a slower pace, watching carefully. The porch boards groaned beneath Rex's weight as the dog stopped in the center and began barking directly at the wooden floor beneath him. One bark, then another. His paws scratched against the planks. Inside the house, 3 local inspectors who had come to survey the property glanced at each other. Michael Brooks, the structural engineer leading the visit, leaned against the doorway and let out a short laugh. "Your dog's seeing ghosts out there, Sergeant," he called. Daniel didn't answer right away. He stepped onto the porch and crouched beside Rex. The dog's body was tense, tail straight, eyes locked on a single spot between the boards as if something beneath the floor had just spoken to him. Rex barked again, louder this time, then scratched harder, claws scraping against dry wood. The boards rattled under the force. "Easy, boy," Daniel murmured, resting a hand on the dog's neck, but Rex barely acknowledged him. The barking continued, sharp and relentless. One of the inspectors inside shook his head. "Probably a squirrel under the house," the man said casually. Michael shrugged. "Or nothing at all." The wind drifted across the empty valley, carrying the faint smell of dust and pine. Daniel pressed his palm flat against the floorboards where Rex kept clawing. For a moment there was nothing, just old wood warmed by the afternoon sun. Then, faintly, he felt it. A vibration, barely there. A quiet humming beneath the floor, like metal shifting somewhere deep below. Daniel lifted his hand slowly, his expression tightening. Rex barked again, louder than before, then stepped back suddenly, ears pinned forward as if the ground itself had whispered something dangerous. Inside the house, Michael laughed again. "Sergeant, I promise you that floor's been sitting there for 70 years. It's not going anywhere." Daniel looked down at Rex. The dog stopped barking for a single second, his eyes flicking toward Daniel with an intensity that felt almost human. Then Rex slammed his paw down on the same board again, and the wood answered with a faint, hollow crack. The sound of the floor cracking beneath Rex's paws echoed in the stillness of the Montana afternoon. Daniel Carter's hand hovered over the boards, the faint hum beneath them still sending a chill through his body. He pressed his palm firmly against the wood, trying to feel for any further movement, but all he could sense was the low, almost imperceptible vibration. Rex stood beside him, his body still tense, tail straight, his amber eyes fixed on the floor as if waiting for it to give way. Daniel stood up slowly, brushing his hand across the side of his uniform as he surveyed the empty yard. The wind picked up, swirling the dry leaves across the porch. The house loomed before them like a silent sentinel, its crumbling exterior hiding secrets it had kept for decades. "All right, Rex," Daniel said quietly, his voice steady, though a faint sense of unease lingered in his gut. "What are you trying to tell me?" The dog's ears perked up in response, as though hearing something Daniel couldn't. Rex barked once more, this time softer, more restrained. Daniel's eyes darted toward the ground, and for a moment, he thought he saw something shift in the shadowed gap between the floorboards. His instincts kicked in, and without another word, he motioned for the team to move back. "Get clear of the porch, everyone," he ordered. Michael, the engineer, scoffed, shaking his head. "It's nothing, Sergeant. You're making a bigger deal out of this than it is." But Daniel wasn't listening. His mind was racing, every instinct from his years of military training urging him to trust Rex. "Move back now," Daniel repeated, his voice sharper this time. The team hesitated but took a few steps back, their eyes still skeptical. Rex's barking stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was thick with tension. Daniel's hand brushed against the floor again, and this time he could feel the vibration more strongly. It wasn't just in the boards, it was in the air, too. A sudden crack split the silence. Daniel stepped back quickly, his heart pounding. The floor beneath Rex's paws gave way with a deafening sound. The wooden planks splintered and collapsed. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he jumped back, narrowly avoiding the falling debris. "What the hell?" Michael shouted from a distance, his voice tinged with disbelief. Rex stood frozen, watching the hole where the floor had once been, his body unmoving but his gaze unwavering. Daniel rushed to the edge of the porch, peering into the darkness below. The opening was wide enough to reveal a hidden, dirt-covered tunnel beneath the house, its walls lined with rusted metal. The smell of stale air and something worse, something chemical, rose from the darkness. Daniel's stomach twisted. "It's a mine shaft," he muttered under his breath. "There's a damn tunnel beneath us." The realization hit him like a jolt of electricity. He turned quickly, searching for any signs of life or danger down below. "Call the rescue team," he ordered sharply. "We need to get down there now." But as he looked at Rex, standing tall and calm despite the chaos, he knew the dog had been right all along. Rex had sensed the danger. He had saved them. Without the dog's warning, the collapse could have trapped them all. Daniel watched as Rex sat by the edge of the broken floor, his gaze soft but steady, as if to say, "It's over now. You're safe." Daniel stood at the edge of the collapsed floor, his gaze fixed on the dark hole below. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of the situation. Rex sat beside him, his posture calm, but his eyes never left the opening. The rest of the team stood at a distance, still in shock, their voices hushed as they exchanged confused glances. Michael, the engineer, was the first to speak up, though his tone had lost its earlier bravado. "You were right," he said quietly, still looking at the gaping hole in disbelief. Daniel didn't respond at first. His mind was racing. His thoughts went over the past few minutes, trying to make sense of it all. Rex had been barking at nothing, or so it seemed. But now, the truth was clear. "Get the rescue team," Daniel finally said, his voice steady, but there was an edge of urgency. He turned his gaze to the team members, who were still processing the situation. "We need to move fast. This could be dangerous." Michael nodded and pulled out his radio, calling for help. Daniel stepped back from the hole, his thoughts drifting to the moment when Rex had first started barking. It had been instinct, nothing more, yet it had saved them. Rex had sensed something no one else could. And now, as they waited for the rescue team to arrive, Daniel couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for the dog beside him. He turned to Rex, his hand resting gently on the dog's head. "Good boy," he murmured, the words feeling insufficient for what the dog had just done. Rex didn't respond, but his amber eyes softened, and he leaned into Daniel's touch. The sound of the radio crackling brought Daniel back to the present. "Rescue team's on the way," Michael said, his voice tense. "They should be here in about 10 minutes. Daniel nodded, then looked back at the hole. The air felt even heavier now, as if the ground itself was holding its breath. He couldn't shake the feeling that something more was buried down there. Something important. Something that needed to be found. He glanced at Rex again. The dog remained still, his focus unbroken, his senses attuned to something beyond what the rest of them could see. It was as if Rex knew the next step, even though no one else did. The faint vibration from the floor earlier was still in Daniel's mind. Was it just the house settling? Or was there more to this old place than they realized? The minutes passed slowly as they waited for the rescue team. Daniel couldn't stand still for long. He paced back and forth, occasionally, glancing at the hole, his mind turning over every possibility. Rex, however, remained calm. His tail was still, but his ears were forward, listening. The dog was ready for whatever came next. Finally, the sound of trucks approaching broke the silence. The rescue team had arrived. Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but only slightly. They weren't out of danger yet. As the rescue team set up their equipment, Daniel gave one last look to Rex. The dog was by his side, as always, ready for whatever would come. Daniel knew one thing for sure. This would be a day they would never forget. As the rescue team set up their equipment, Daniel stood back, his eyes scanning the hole in the floor, still filled with a mix of disbelief and curiosity. He could hear the low hum of the trucks and the shuffle of boots on gravel as the team organized their gear. Rex stood by his side, his presence unwavering, his sharp eyes never leaving the gaping hole. The dog seemed to sense the tension in the air, his muscles taut, ready for whatever came next. Daniel couldn't help but admire the dog's quiet confidence. Rex had saved them, no question. But now, there was something in Daniel's gut telling him that the dog knew more than anyone else. That there was more hidden beneath the floorboards. As the team prepared, one of the rescue workers, a tall woman with dark hair named Emily, approached Daniel. "We're going to need to check the structural integrity before we go down," she said, her voice calm but steady. "It's a tight squeeze, but we have the tools." Daniel nodded, his gaze shifting to Rex. "He was the one who found it," Daniel said, his voice soft. Emily raised an eyebrow but said nothing, focusing instead on the task at hand. She motioned to the other workers to start measuring and assessing the area around the hole. Meanwhile, Daniel took a step back, pulling out his phone to check in with the command center. As he spoke to the team, he kept an eye on Rex, whose focus hadn't wavered. It was as though the dog could sense the danger still lurking, waiting for them to uncover it. Minutes passed as the team worked quickly, setting up ropes and harnesses. Daniel's thoughts drifted back to the vibrations he had felt earlier, the way the ground had seemed to hum under his hand. It wasn't just the house settling. Something had been disturbed. Something deeper. "We're ready to go down," Emily said, snapping Daniel out of his thoughts. She gestured for him to follow as the team began to descend into the tunnel. The walls of the shaft were narrow, barely enough room for one person to move at a time. Daniel followed closely behind Emily, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Rex stayed close, walking with the same quiet determination that had guided them since the beginning. They descended further into the tunnel, the air growing colder with every step. The faint smell of rust and earth filled their nostrils, but there was something else, something chemical, that Daniel couldn't place. It was a sharp, almost metallic scent, and it seemed to grow stronger the deeper they went. As they moved forward, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he scanned the shadows ahead. "Stay alert," he whispered to Emily, though his voice seemed to echo in the still air. She nodded, her eyes scanning the tunnel ahead. They reached a small clearing in the center of the tunnel, and that's when they saw it. At the far end, partially buried in dirt and dust, was a large, rusted metal door. It looked ancient, as though it had been sealed shut for years. Daniel stepped closer, his hand hovering over the surface. He could feel a faint, almost imperceptible vibration coming from the door. Rex whined softly, his tail twitching slightly as he approached. The dog's nose twitched as he sniffed the air, then let out a low growl. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just any ordinary door. "What is this?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she moved up beside Daniel. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He was too focused on the door, too aware of the strange feeling that had settled in his chest. The vibration was stronger now, almost as if the door itself was alive. Rex continued to growl softly, his eyes fixed on the door, sensing something that none of them could understand yet. Daniel's hand clenched into a fist, his mind racing. What was behind that door? And why had Rex reacted so strongly? He didn't have an answer. But one thing was clear. The dog had led them here for a reason, and they weren't leaving until they uncovered the truth. Daniel stood frozen, his eyes locked on the rusted metal door that lay ahead. Rex, as always, stood by his side, his body tense, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. The dog's growl had softened, but the unease in his eyes had not. It was as if Rex knew something the rest of them didn't, something dangerous. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. The vibration from the door was stronger now, almost like a hum, as if the door itself were alive. He glanced over at Emily, who stood beside him, her expression unreadable. "What do you think?" Daniel asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily crouched down, brushing her hand over the surface of the door. "It's old, really old," she said, her fingers tracing the faint engravings on the metal. "I can't tell what it is, but it doesn't look like any door I've ever seen. It's like it's been sealed off for a reason," Daniel murmured, his eyes still fixed on the door. "What do you think is behind it?" Emily stood up, dusting her hands off as she turned to face him. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's been hidden for a long time. The question is, do we want to find out? Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked down at Rex, who was still standing at attention, his eyes fixed on the door with an intensity that made Daniel's stomach twist. The dog was waiting for something. Waiting for them to make a move. We're not leaving until we find out what's behind that door, Daniel said, his voice steady. Emily looked at him for a moment, as if trying to gauge his certainty. Finally, she nodded. All right then, let's get to work. The team set to work quickly, using the tools they had brought with them to start loosening the door. Rex stayed by Daniel's side, never straying far, his ears pricked forward as if listening for any sign of movement from beyond the door. The air was thick with tension, and as they worked, Daniel's mind kept drifting back to the vibrations he had felt earlier. Something about this place didn't sit right with him. The vibrations, the strange scent in the air, Rex's behavior, it all pointed to something much bigger than just an old mine shaft. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emily stepped back. It's loose, she said. Daniel moved forward, his heart racing. He had no idea what he was about to uncover, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, it had been waiting for them. The door creaked as it slowly opened, revealing a dark, narrow passageway beyond. Daniel couldn't see much, but he could feel the air shift as a cold draft blew from inside. Rex stepped forward, his body low, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. Without a word, Daniel followed, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness in front of him. The tunnel stretched on for what seemed like miles, the walls narrow and damp, the air heavy with the scent of earth and rust. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, Daniel's thoughts raced. What could be so important that it had been hidden away for so long? What were they about to uncover? Rex, as always, led the way, his movements silent but purposeful. The dog's instincts were sharper than anything Daniel had ever known, and right now, Daniel needed that. He needed to trust Rex, to trust that the dog was guiding them to something important, something they were meant to find. The deeper they went, the more intense the feeling in Daniel's chest became. It was as if the tunnel itself was alive, its walls closing in around them with every step. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Keep your eyes open, Daniel whispered to Emily, who nodded, her hand gripping the flashlight tightly. The deeper they went, the darker it became, until they were swallowed by the blackness of the tunnel. The air was thick with dust, and every breath felt like it was dragging them further into the unknown. But Daniel didn't care. They were going to find out what was hidden here, no matter the cost. As Daniel and Emily moved deeper into the tunnel, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. The only sound was the steady rhythm of their footsteps, echoing in the narrow passageway. Rex, ever vigilant, led the way, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air, his body low to the ground. Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of unease building in his chest. There was something about this place, something off, that he couldn't shake. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became. The walls were damp, the ground uneven beneath their boots, and every so often, Daniel could hear the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. It felt like the tunnel was alive, breathing with them, and yet it remained silent, as if waiting for them to discover something. Rex stopped suddenly, his body stiffening as he sniffed the air once more. His ears were flat against his head, and his eyes locked on a section of the wall ahead. Daniel froze, his heart racing. What is it, boy? Daniel whispered, his hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight in his pocket. Rex's growl was soft but steady, a low rumble that seemed to reverberate through the tunnel. Daniel motioned for Emily to stay back and moved cautiously toward Rex. The dog's gaze remained fixed on the wall, his body taut with anticipation. What's there? Daniel muttered under his breath. He approached the spot where Rex was staring, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As the light hit the wall, Daniel noticed something odd, an indentation, barely noticeable, but enough to catch his attention. He knelt down, examining it closely. The shape was strange, almost like a symbol, carved deep into the stone. What the hell? Daniel muttered, his fingers brushing over the grooves. The symbol was unlike anything he had ever seen, a series of jagged lines forming an intricate pattern. It was old, too old, but it didn't look natural. It almost looked purposeful. Rex's growl deepened, and he stepped forward, his paws patting silently against the stone. He sniffed the air again, and then let out a sharp bark. It wasn't a warning bark, but more of a command, as though telling Daniel to look closer. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He ran his fingers along the symbol, feeling the edges of the grooves. They were smooth, worn by time, but they were still there, etched into the wall like a hidden message. As he traced the lines, he noticed something shift. The wall seemed to hum, faintly, as if something deep within the tunnel had awakened. Daniel stepped back, his pulse quickening. "Emily," he called softly, not wanting to alarm her. "Get over here. I think we've found something." Emily stepped forward cautiously, her flashlight beam falling on the symbol. She frowned, her brow furrowing as she crouched down beside Daniel. "What is that?" she asked, her voice filled with intrigue and concern. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But it's not just some random carving. This was put here for a reason." As Emily examined the symbol, Daniel stood up, his mind racing. The vibration from earlier was stronger now, pulsing through the walls, through the ground. It felt like the entire tunnel was alive, like it was responding to something they had just uncovered. Rex, still alert, turned and began to move away from the symbol, his tail low and stiff. He stopped a few feet ahead, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. Daniel exchanged a look with Emily. They both knew something was coming. Something was about to happen. The quiet hum of the tunnel grew louder, the walls vibrating with energy, and in the distance, they heard it. A faint sound, like a door creaking open, a noise that sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. "Get ready," he whispered to Emily. She nodded, her hand tightening on her flashlight. They had no idea what they were about to face, but one thing was clear. This tunnel was hiding something. Something powerful, something dangerous. And Rex had led them here for a reason. As the eerie sound of the door creaking open echoed through the tunnel, Daniel's grip on his flashlight tightened. The faint vibrations from the walls intensified, almost as if the very ground beneath them was awakening. Rex, standing motionless just ahead, let out a low growl, his body rigid with tension. Daniel's heart raced as he scanned the dark expanse before them, every instinct screaming that something was about to happen. Emily stood by his side, her eyes wide with both curiosity and wariness. She had no idea what they were dealing with, but she knew one thing for sure. The situation was growing more dangerous by the second. "What do you think it is?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the increasing hum of the tunnel. Daniel didn't answer at first. His thoughts raced, but he couldn't make sense of what was happening. They had come to this tunnel hoping to find answers, and now, it seemed like they were on the brink of uncovering something far bigger and far more dangerous than either of them had imagined. Rex's growl deepened as the sound grew louder. The door ahead of them, old and rusted, had creaked open a fraction of an inch. It was barely noticeable, but the tension in the air was undeniable. It was as if something unseen, something powerful, was trying to push its way into their world. "Stay close," Daniel muttered, his voice low and steady. He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Rex. The dog, as always, seemed to know something Daniel didn't. His posture was taut, ears forward, watching the dark void ahead. Slowly, Daniel approached the door, his hand hovering over the cold metal surface. The hum of the tunnel grew louder, the vibrations intensifying in his chest. "Rex," Daniel called softly. "Find it." The dog's amber eyes shifted to him for a brief moment, then turned back to the door. Rex took a step forward, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. The ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, just slightly, and the air grew colder. It was as if the tunnel itself was breathing, exhaling a long-held secret. Rex let out a sharp bark, his body tense with urgency. Daniel reached for the handle of the door, his fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against the cold metal. Without thinking, he turned the handle. The door groaned, the sound of old hinges protesting, and then slowly, it swung open, revealing what lay beyond. The beam from Daniel's flashlight flickered as it cut through the dark, revealing a narrow corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly into the shadows. The walls were lined with rusted pipes and worn metal, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and stale air. It was like stepping into another world, a world long forgotten, buried beneath the earth. Daniel felt the weight of the tunnel pressing in on him, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding. He could feel it now, a strange energy in the air, a presence that he couldn't see but could feel in his bones. Rex stepped forward, moving cautiously, his paws making no sound against the cold stone floor. His eyes never left the darkness ahead. "What is this place?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel shook his head, his mind still racing. He didn't have an answer, but he knew they had to keep moving. "Stay close," he urged again, his voice low. "We need to find out what's down here." The tunnel seemed to stretch on for miles, the walls narrowing as they moved deeper into the earth. The air grew colder, and the faint hum from the tunnel continued to vibrate through their bodies. It was as if the tunnel itself was alive, guiding them deeper into its heart. Rex moved ahead of them, his body low to the ground, his eyes focused on the dark path ahead. The dog's instincts were sharper than any human's, and Daniel knew that Rex was leading them to something important, something that had been hidden away for far too long. As they continued deeper into the darkness, Daniel's thoughts lingered on the strange vibrations in the walls, the low hum that seemed to be growing louder with each step. Whatever they were about to find, Daniel knew they were on the brink of uncovering a secret that had been buried for a reason. They just didn't know yet what that reason was. The deeper they went into the tunnel, the more oppressive the air became. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the low hum that had been vibrating through the ground grew louder, more intense. It was almost as if the tunnel was alive, pulsing with energy, guiding them further into its depths. Rex, as always, led the way, his movements graceful and purposeful, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air, his ears pricked forward. Daniel and Emily followed closely behind, their eyes scanning the darkness, their minds racing with questions they couldn't answer. What had they stumbled upon? What was hidden down here? The faint glow of their flashlights barely cut through the thick darkness. Every step they took seemed to lead them further into the unknown. The walls of the tunnel were narrow, lined with rusted pipes and worn metal, and the air felt cold and heavy, as if it had been trapped down here for years. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though there was no sign of life. No sound but the faint hum that seemed to come from the very walls. Rex paused suddenly, his body stiffening. He sniffed the air again, his eyes narrowing as he stared into the distance. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The dog's instincts were sharper than anyone's, and when Rex acted like this, Daniel knew. Something was coming. "What is it, boy?" Daniel whispered, crouching down next to the dog. Rex's tail was low, and his body was taut, every muscle ready for whatever lay ahead. Daniel stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight at his side. He could feel the tension building in the air, and a sense of unease settled over him. Something was about to happen. "Stay close," Daniel said quietly to Emily, who nodded, her face tense with apprehension. They had come this far, but the unknown still loomed ahead, and it felt as though the tunnel itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to make the next move. Rex took another cautious step forward, and Daniel followed, his heart pounding in his chest. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, the air grew colder, the hum from the walls growing louder with each step. The darkness around them seemed to press in, but Daniel pushed forward, knowing that whatever lay ahead was a mystery that needed to be uncovered. They reached a small, dimly lit chamber at the end of the tunnel. The walls here were lined with ancient-looking machinery, some of it covered in rust and grime, while others seemed oddly pristine, untouched by time. The flickering light from their flashlights danced across the walls, casting strange shadows. Rex stepped forward again, his eyes fixed on something in the far corner of the room. Daniel followed the dog's gaze, his flashlight beam landing on a strange, large object, something metallic, shaped like a giant box, with wires and pipes coming out of it. It looked out of place, almost futuristic, yet it had the same age as the rest of the room. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "What the hell is that?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible in the thick silence. Daniel stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached for the object. The closer he got, the more he could feel the strange energy emanating from it, a subtle vibration that resonated deep in his bones. Rex growled softly, standing guard as Daniel examined the object. It was clear now, whatever this was, it wasn't just some leftover piece of machinery. It was something important, something that had been hidden away, deep underground, For a reason. I don't know, Daniel said softly, his voice tense with both awe and fear. But we're going to find out. As he touched the metal surface, a sharp, low sound echoed through the room, and the object seemed to come to life. The hum from the walls grew louder, the vibrations intensifying. Daniel quickly pulled his hand back, but it was too late. The object started to shift, the wires and pipes humming as they began to glow with an eerie, unnatural light. Rex barked, stepping back from the object, his growl deepening. Daniel's mind raced. What had they just activated? The room seemed to pulse with energy, the walls vibrating as if they were being charged by some unseen force. He looked at Emily, who was frozen in place, her eyes wide with fear. Stay close, he whispered again, though he wasn't sure if it was for her or for himself. The air in the room grew thick, as if the very space was charged with something powerful and dangerous. They had uncovered something they were never meant to find, and now they had no choice but to see it through to the end. The eerie hum of the machine grew louder, its metallic body shaking slightly as it began to pulse with a strange energy. The glow from the wires and pipes illuminated the small room, casting long shadows on the walls. Daniel stood frozen, his eyes wide as he watched the object come to life before them. The vibrations beneath his feet seemed to echo in his chest, and he could feel the air around him growing thick with tension. Rex, ever watchful, backed away, his growl deepening as he paced in small circles. Daniel could sense the unease in the dog, and his own nerves were on edge. The object in front of them was no longer just some forgotten piece of technology. It was something far more powerful, far more dangerous than they could have anticipated. Emily stepped forward cautiously, her flashlight beam now reflecting off the object's smooth surface. Her eyes were filled with a mix of wonder and fear, but she didn't speak. The silence was deafening as the strange machine continued to hum, the energy intensifying by the second. What do you think it is? Emily finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. Daniel shook his head slowly, his mind racing. He had no idea, but he knew one thing for sure. This was no ordinary find. I don't know, he said quietly, his gaze never leaving the glowing object. But we need to figure it out. His voice was steady, but his heart was pounding in his chest. There was a sense of urgency now, a feeling that they were on the cusp of uncovering something monumental, something that had been hidden away for a reason. Rex's growl deepened, his body low to the ground as he circled the object, sniffing the air. Daniel could feel the dog's tension, and he knew that whatever this was, it wasn't just technology. It was something alive, something with purpose. We can't just leave, Daniel muttered to himself, his fingers twitching with the need to understand. Emily stepped closer, glancing at him for a moment before turning her attention back to the machine. She was clearly as unnerved as Daniel, but her curiosity was pushing her forward. It's like it's been waiting for us, she said softly, her voice full of awe. Daniel nodded, his eyes narrowed. That's exactly how it felt. The machine was responding to them, to their presence, as if it had been lying dormant, waiting for someone to come along and activate it. A low clicking sound echoed from the machine, as if it was preparing to do something. The air grew even thicker, charged with the energy that now surrounded them. Daniel's mind raced as he tried to make sense of it all. We need to be ready for anything, he said quietly, his eyes flicking over to Emily. She nodded without a word, and Daniel took a step forward, his hand hovering near the machine. As his fingers brushed against the surface, the hum suddenly stopped. The room fell into a heavy silence, and for a moment, Daniel wasn't sure if the machine had powered down or if something else was about to happen. He glanced at Emily, who looked just as confused. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet shifted. The tunnel seemed to groan, as if responding to the machine's activation. Rex's bark cut through the silence, a sharp, urgent sound that made Daniel's blood run cold. The dog was backing away, eyes wide with panic. Get back, Daniel shouted, but it was too late. The walls of the tunnel began to shake, and the floor cracked beneath them. Dust and debris fell from above as the vibrations intensified. Something was happening, something they weren't prepared for. The energy that had been pulsing from the machine surged, sending a shock wave through the room. Daniel instinctively grabbed Emily, pulling her away from the epicenter of the chaos. Rex was already moving, darting back toward the tunnel entrance, barking frantically. Daniel didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing. They needed to get out, and fast. The walls continued to shake, and the air was thick with a strange, unnatural force. Daniel pushed Emily forward, his heart racing as the ground trembled beneath them. He looked back at the machine one last time, seeing the glow flicker and pulse before everything went black. The darkness that followed the explosion of energy was suffocating. Daniel blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of the sudden absence of light. The hum, the vibration, the oppressive atmosphere. Everything had vanished in an instant. He could barely hear himself breathe, and the air felt thick, heavy, as if the world itself had stopped. His hand reached out instinctively, searching for anything, for Emily, for a sign of life. "Emily," he called, his voice trembling as it echoed through the thick silence. His words felt foreign, swallowed by the heavy, suffocating void around him. His mind raced, the confusion and fear setting in. Was it over? Had the tunnel collapsed? Was there still time to escape? He felt his way forward slowly, one step at a time, his hand brushing against the rough, cold stone walls. His fingers moved with urgency, but they seemed to trail through nothingness. The ground beneath him was solid, but the world felt fragile, like everything might fall apart with the slightest movement. He called again, this time louder. "Emily." The sound of his own voice cut through the silence, but there was no response. His stomach churned, and panic rose in his chest. He had to find her. He couldn't lose her now. He pushed forward, desperation in his movements. The darkness seemed to press in from every side, suffocating and all-encompassing. Then, through the murk of the dark, Daniel heard it. A faint rustling, a soft, familiar bark. Rex! His heart leapt in his chest, and he rushed toward the sound. The tunnel felt endless, stretching on forever, and yet the sound of Rex's bark guided him forward, each step a little more certain than the last. The flashlight he'd been carrying had gone out, but the dim glow of something ahead caught his eye. It was faint, but it was there. He pushed forward, each step more determined than the last. His mind was on one thing now, finding Emily. As he neared the source of the light, he stumbled over something. A broken pipe, a piece of debris, his foot catching as he almost fell. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Then, just as suddenly as the darkness had come, the faint glow brightened. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as the light took shape. It was coming from the machine, the one that had activated moments before everything had gone dark. But now, the machine was no longer a simple object. It was something else entirely. The energy surrounding it had shifted, and there was a sense of quiet power radiating from it, an almost unnatural stillness that hung in the air. Daniel's thoughts raced. What had happened? Had they unleashed something they couldn't control? His hand tightened around the flashlight as he stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. As he neared the source of the glow, he finally saw her. Emily, standing still, her face lit by the soft, eerie light from the machine. Her eyes were wide, but there was something about her expression that made Daniel hesitate. Was she in shock? Was she okay? "Emily," he whispered, taking a cautious step toward her. She didn't respond immediately, but slowly, her gaze shifted to meet his. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice distant, almost detached. I think we found it." Her words sent a chill down Daniel's spine. "Found what?" he asked, his voice a little rougher than he intended. Emily stepped aside, her eyes not leaving the machine. "This." She gestured to the glowing object. "I think it's a gateway." Daniel's mind struggled to catch up with her words. A gateway? To what? What was this thing, really? "We have to go," Daniel said urgently, his voice filled with panic. "It's not safe here. We don't know what we're dealing with." But Emily didn't move. Her gaze remained fixed on the machine, and her expression remained distant, as though something in the light was pulling her in. "Emily," Daniel said again, his voice growing more insistent. "We need to get out now." Emily's eyes finally flickered to him, but there was no recognition in them. She looked almost as though she were in a trance. "It's calling us," she said softly. "It's calling us home." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't his Emily standing in front of him. Something had changed. Something was wrong. He could feel it deep in his bones. "No," he said firmly, stepping forward and grabbing her arm. "We need to leave. Now." The moment his hand touched her, the ground trembled again. This time, It wasn't just a vibration, it was a shock wave, rippling through the tunnel. The walls cracked, dust and debris falling from the ceiling as the very foundation of the tunnel seemed to shift beneath them. "Move!" Daniel shouted, pulling Emily away from the machine. Rex barked once more, his growls louder this time, as if warning them both. The tunnel was collapsing. It was time to run. Daniel grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her with him as they sprinted toward the exit. The walls shook violently, the glow from the machine dimming behind them, but they couldn't stop now. They had to make it out before it was too late. The ground shook beneath their feet as Daniel pulled Emily through the crumbling tunnel. Rex was ahead, his body low to the ground, running faster than they could keep up. The tunnel's walls groaned, cracked spiderwebbing across the stone as dust and debris fell from above. The faint glow of the machine behind them flickered, casting strange shadows against the walls. Daniel's heart raced, each step feeling like they were running out of time. The rumbling of the tunnel grew louder, more violent, and the sense of urgency surged through him. "Keep up," he shouted to Emily, pulling her forward. Her steps were slower, hesitant, her mind still caught in the strange trance that had overtaken her earlier. He glanced back, seeing the dim light of the machine still pulsating in the distance. The walls around them continued to tremble, and every second felt like it could be their last. "Emily," he called again, more urgently this time. She blinked, shaking her head as if waking from a dream. Her eyes met his, and for the first time since they had entered the tunnel, she seemed to truly see him. "We need to get out," Daniel said, his voice firm, almost desperate. Emily nodded quickly, her face pale, and she broke into a run beside him. The tunnel was narrowing as they moved forward, the walls squeezing in like they were closing them in. The only sound now was the pounding of their feet against the stone and Rex's distant bark, urging them to move faster. Daniel pushed himself harder, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the tunnel twisted and turned, the path ahead growing darker. The ground continued to shake, and every time they rounded a corner, the tunnel seemed to shift beneath them, as if the earth itself was fighting to keep them trapped inside. They reached a junction in the tunnel, and Daniel hesitated for just a moment, trying to remember the way they had come. The panic in his chest threatened to take over, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to lose focus. "This way," he shouted, grabbing Emily's hand and pulling her toward a narrow passage to the right. Rex was already waiting for them at the end, his tail stiff, eyes wide with alertness. He barked again, a sharp, commanding sound, urging them to move faster. Daniel didn't hesitate. He had learned to trust Rex's instincts, and now was no different. As they ran, the air grew thicker, and Daniel could feel the temperature dropping. The hum from the machine had faded, replaced by the sound of the tunnel collapsing behind them. They were running out of time. "We're almost there," Daniel said, though he wasn't entirely sure. He had no idea how much further they needed to go, but he had to believe they were close. Just as he thought they were nearing the exit, the walls around them groaned again, louder this time, and the ground beneath their feet shifted violently. A loud crash sounded from behind them, and Daniel spun around, his heart in his throat. The tunnel they had just passed through was beginning to cave in, rocks and debris tumbling down like a wave. The path they had come from was now completely blocked. They were trapped. "No," Daniel shouted, his voice breaking as he turned back to Emily. She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear, but he could see the determination in them as well. "We have to keep going," she said, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. They had no choice now. They were trapped, but they still had each other. And Rex. "This way," Daniel shouted, pushing forward with everything he had left. The exit had to be close. Rex was already ahead, his body low, leading them toward the light that now flickered in the distance. As they reached the end of the tunnel, the ground beneath them began to shake again, but this time, it wasn't the tunnel collapsing, it was something else. The light ahead grew brighter, and Daniel could see it now. The exit. They were almost out. Just a little further. He pushed himself faster, urging Emily along. With one last burst of energy, they reached the end of the tunnel, stepping into the cool night air. Daniel breathed a sigh of relief, looking up at the stars above them. They had made it. But even as he looked up, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them out of the tunnel. Something that had been awakened by the machine. something they weren't yet ready to face. As they stepped out of the tunnel and into the open air, Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the coolness of the night sky on his skin. It felt almost surreal to be outside again, the vast, dark landscape of Montana stretching before them. The stars above were clear and bright, but the quiet of the night felt oddly heavy, as if something was lingering in the air, watching them. Emily stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon, but her expression was distant, as though she, too, could feel the weight of what they had just escaped. Rex stood at attention, his ears perked, his gaze still fixed on the darkness that surrounded them. He was alert, the growl in his chest a constant reminder that whatever had been unleashed in the tunnel had followed them. Daniel turned to Emily, his voice low. "We made it out, but something doesn't feel right." Emily nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing as she looked around. "Yeah, I feel it too," she replied, her voice a whisper in the night. "Like something is out there, watching us." The stillness around them seemed almost oppressive now, the air thick with the sense of something unseen, lurking just beyond their vision. Daniel's mind raced. They had uncovered the machine deep within the earth, and though they had escaped its immediate grasp, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was far from over. What had they really unleashed? What had they disturbed beneath the surface? Rex's head snapped toward the trees that lined the edge of the clearing, his growl deepening. Daniel followed the dog's gaze, his own heart quickening. "Rex," Daniel murmured, his hand resting on the dog's back. "What is it, boy?" Rex's growl intensified, and he took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving the shadows ahead. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The dog was never like this unless something was seriously wrong. "Stay close," Daniel said, pulling Emily closer. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there wasn't just a threat. It was a presence, something that had been waiting for them. Something connected to the machine they had activated. "We need to keep moving," Daniel urged, taking a step forward, away from the tunnel entrance and toward the trees. "We need to get back to the truck, get some distance between us and whatever that thing was." Emily didn't argue, but she stayed close, her steps cautious as they moved through the clearing. Rex led the way, his body low, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Daniel's mind was still racing, thinking of all the possible consequences of what they had found, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever had followed them out of the tunnel, it wasn't just a random occurrence. The machine had done something, and now they were paying the price. The air seemed to grow heavier the further they moved from the tunnel, and the distant sound of the wind rustling through the trees almost seemed to carry whispers, faint and indistinct. Daniel's grip on Emily's hand tightened. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily looked at him, her face pale. "I hear it. It sounds like whispering." Daniel's eyes darted around, scanning the dark trees, but he saw nothing. The rustling sound grew louder, but no matter how hard he tried to focus, he couldn't make out any words. It was as if the night itself was alive, carrying secrets he couldn't understand. "We need to get to the truck now," Daniel said, his voice tense. They were almost to the edge of the clearing when Rex suddenly stopped, his body stiffening, his tail raised high in warning. Daniel froze, his heart skipping a beat. Rex's eyes were fixed on the trees ahead, his growl vibrating through the air. Daniel's instincts told him to be ready. He reached for the radio on his belt, but before he could speak, Rex barked sharply, then charged forward into the trees. "Rex!" Daniel shouted, but the dog was already gone, moving faster than Daniel could follow. Without thinking, Daniel broke into a run after him, Emily right behind him. The sound of Rex's barking grew louder, but as they entered the trees, the noise around them seemed to warp and distort. The whispering grew louder, clearer, and Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he fought to catch up to the dog. Suddenly, the trees opened into a small clearing, and Daniel stopped dead in his tracks. Rex was there, standing at the center, facing a massive stone structure half covered in moss and vines. It was ancient, its surface covered in strange symbols that looked eerily similar to the ones they had found in the tunnel. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The machine, the tunnel, the strange energy, it was all connected. And now they had stumbled upon the source. The whispering sound grew louder, almost deafening, and Daniel knew, without a doubt, that whatever this was, it was far from over. Daniel stood frozen in the clearing, his eyes fixed on the stone structure ahead. The ancient symbols carved into its surface seemed to glow faintly, the eerie whispers now surrounding them, coming from all directions. It was as if the very air was charged with something unnatural. Rex, his fur bristling, stood at the center of the clearing, his body stiff with alertness. The growl deep in his chest reverberated through the quiet, warning of something unseen, something more powerful than anything they had encountered before. Emily stood beside Daniel, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. She had been with him through every step of this journey, but now, in this moment, she too could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. "What is this place?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing hum of energy in the air. Daniel shook his head, his mind racing. He didn't know what it was, but he felt the urgency in the air, the sense that whatever lay ahead was more than just a discovery. It was a force that had been waiting to be awakened. The structure before them was like nothing they had ever seen. It was as though it had been crafted by ancient hands, and yet, it felt disturbingly familiar. The symbols etched into the stone were intricate, almost alive, their shapes twisting and changing in the dim light. It was as if the stone itself was reacting to their presence, responding to the machine they had activated earlier. "We need to leave," Daniel said firmly, his voice breaking the silence. He turned to Emily, his hand reaching out to pull her back, but she didn't move. Her gaze was locked on the stone structure, and her face had taken on a look of utter fascination. "Emily, come on," Daniel urged, but his words fell on deaf ears. She seemed to be lost in the pull of the structure, as though something invisible was drawing her in. "It's calling me," she murmured, her voice distant. "I think it wants us to understand." Daniel's heart raced. He had never seen her like this. This wasn't the Emily he knew. Something was changing in her, something that terrified him. He stepped forward, but as he did, Rex barked sharply, his voice filled with warning. The dog was right. They had to leave. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't something they should stay to investigate. Daniel reached out again, this time gripping Emily's arm firmly. "We need to go now," he said, his voice desperate. Slowly, Emily turned to him, her eyes coming back into focus. She blinked, as if waking from a trance, and for a moment, there was confusion in her eyes. But it didn't last. The ground beneath them suddenly trembled again, a deep rumble echoing through the clearing. The stone structure seemed to shift, the symbols glowing brighter, and the hum of energy intensified. Rex's growl turned into a full-throated bark, and he darted to the edge of the clearing, pulling Daniel and Emily with him. Daniel didn't hesitate this time. They ran. The air felt heavier with every step, and the sound of the rumbling tunnel behind them seemed to follow them, echoing in their ears. The structure was still there, but it felt distant now, its power no longer a pull, but a warning. They reached the edge of the clearing and found themselves on the familiar path leading back to the truck. The night air was cool against their skin, but the tension in the air hadn't eased. The ground behind them shook one last time, and Daniel dared not look back. He knew what they had uncovered was far from over, but the truth was, whatever had happened in that tunnel, whatever that machine had done, it was just the beginning. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew that they had awoken something that couldn't be ignored. Rex stopped just before the truck, his head turning to look back at the clearing. He barked once, sharply, then turned to Daniel, his amber eyes filled with something Daniel couldn't quite understand. Fear, caution, or something else. "Let's go," Daniel said, his voice thick with urgency. Emily climbed into the truck, and Daniel followed quickly, not once looking back. As they drove away from the clearing, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them, waiting for them to return. The whispers were gone, but the power that had been awakened in that tunnel still lingered in the air, a reminder that some secrets were never meant to be uncovered.